Big 12 coaches have made it clear that realignment is not done, but some have the best interest of this conference in mind and others want to get out. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thanks for making this show your first listen every single day. Today, we're joined by TJ Pittenger of College Football Addiction to talk which Big 12 team is headed out the door next with Texas and Oklahoma gone. We'll also talk how those two schools will get immediately blasted in some way or form in the SEC. And we'll finish it out with how Utah has a new head football coach. That one's weird. Where we'll start, though, TJ, the Big 12 just loses Texas and Oklahoma. And I know we'll get into specifically the middle segment, what that means for the conference, what it means for those two schools and the SEC. But we've heard Kyle Whittingham talk about how there's more expansion coming, more realignment coming. He doesn't know if they'll be playing BYU in a couple of years. We've heard Joey McGuire say that realignment is not done. Is this a West Virginia to the ACC, Utah to the Big Ten? I mean, who is next out of the Big 12 to say, look, I'm not happy here anymore, the same way Texas and OU did?
Yeah, I think we're somewhat I don't think we're imminent, right? I don't think we're very close to that, because I do think that truly the next round is the Florida State, the Clemson, the North Carolina. I think Miami, wherever they land, which we've talked Big 12, we've talked Big 10. I do think there's more of that needs to happen. But then I do agree. I think there's some shifting that goes on. Now, I don't know that West Virginia to the ACC makes a ton of sense unless they're really able to figure out a way to bolster that. I think West Virginia is in a better spot right now. And it's more likely that teams that are comparable to West Virginia, Louisville, Pitt, others, end up in the Big 12 as opposed to WVU going out to the Atlantic Coast Conference. This might be a crazy take because they just got out of the group of five stance now, but man, it wouldn't surprise me to eventually see UCF get snagged. I think that Florida recruiting ground is so solid. And it's almost like if UCF can get all of Florida State and Florida and Miami's leftovers on the recruiting trail, that's a better recruiting class than almost everybody else like in the Big 12 could even think to put together, right? Like the low 4 stars in Florida and the high 3 stars in Florida, it is not going to take long, in my opinion. Now, I'm projecting out. I'm talking 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. I don't think it's going to be long for UCF to start to really do well, especially if Malzahn stays there, which, he says that he's happy long term there. We'll see. I could see UCF being a team that eventually makes their way out. They're a huge alumni base, one of the biggest in the country. They are way into the black. They make so much money, it's not even funny. They've got, with that big alumni base, they've got a lot of money that's coming back into the school. And then again, if you're recruiting, if you're winning in the Big 12, I think you're eventually looked at. And so they're one that I would look at. I think Utah, you mentioned Utah. I could see Utah in the Big 10 at some point, and I don't know if that would be on a reduced revenue share. I don't know exactly how that would work out, but they feel like the next team, like if you were like, which team is going the fastest, I'd probably point to Utah. Like, I don't necessarily see it with a lot of the other, Big 12 teams that were originally there. Maybe if somebody wanted to get real crazy in basketball, you'd pull a Kansas or something. But Utah feels like the team to me. Most stability. They're kind of they're a not national brand, but they're kind of spreading the Big Ten's reach a little bit, like they did with USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington. So Utah would be my first pick. UCF's kind of my sneaky underrated one.
Is there a world in which these conferences, for a Big Ten, you say, we understand the value of a Utah is a whole lot better than Illinois? At what point is there a, not even relegation, but the standards reset and a conference like the ACC says to Syracuse, and the Big Ten says to Illinois or Purdue, hey, we can't do this anymore? When do we start seeing teams excommunicated from these leagues? Because there are schools that don't make financial sense any longer.
Well, the easy answer to that is when Fox and ESPN tell them to. I mean, that's that when the people with the money call the shots say, hey, we need to move this along. I think the way that looks like in practice, and what I've been big on college football addiction is talking about, is a minimum investment, a buy-in almost of, hey, the way that, there are salary caps in our major sports leagues, but there are also salary minimums. Like, you can't just be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and spend $14 million on your team. You have to spend, there's a minimum threshold, just like there's a minimum speed limit on the highway, right? You can't go below 40 because it's just not safe. It just doesn't make sense. And so to me, that's where we've got to get to in sports. It's, hey, you don't want to compete at the highest level. You don't want to try and compete for championships. That's okay. We're okay with that. You're just not allowed to stay here and reap the benefits of how Michigan's busting their butt and how Ohio State spending $200 million a year to try and be good in football, and how USC and UCLA and Cal and all these other programs are spending what they're supposed to spend. Illinois, you got to step up. Rutgers, you got to step up. And I think it's more of it's probably a percentage type thing, because obviously they don't make the same amount of money. But to me, there's got to be like a minimum spend to continue to reap the benefits. And so, I don't necessarily know that they would get excommunicated. I don't think that's out of the question, but I do think they would probably renegotiate some of the way that these even revenue payouts work. Because if you're investing everything you've got as Ohio State into football, why does Rutgers get the same payout as you from a media perspective? They're not worth as much as you are. They don't bring any eyes to the table to the same degree. They're not bringing any even close to as much value, and they're not even putting that effort. They're not even investing that money back into their sports. Like, what are we doing here? So I think it is coming. And again, the easy answer is when Fox and ESPN tell them to. But you bring up a good point. Can we eventually get there? And I think the answer is yes.
Florida State wasn't happy that they're the bell cow, and Boston College gets to reap that. It gets to reap the benefits of what Clemson and Florida State were able to give to the ACC. I think that day comes for a Cincinnati. If in the Big 12, they aren't making more sense from a football standpoint financially soon. Coming up, Texas, Oklahoma, the SEC. Is this thing going to actually work? For one school, definitely not. This, Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is where I go to buy tickets all the time. I'm going in August to see Tyler Childers play a concert in Idaho. And you're like, oh, okay. Do you have the tickets, right? You bought the plane, you bought the hotel. Do you have I don't have the tickets. No, I don't need the tickets right now, because with Game Time, last minute deals are their forte. Save up to 60% on buying last minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Flash deals, zone deals, all in pricing. Toggle that feature. You see the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views, get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy those tickets. Game Time's ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the industry. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices. That is guaranteed. TJ Pittenger of College Football Addiction. Texas and Oklahoma are off to the SEC, and I've heard so many members of that conference scoff within the last couple of days as those two have entered. What are the odds, especially as floundering as Oklahoma has been, as bad as Texas has been over the last 15 years, though they obviously are much improved in the college football playoff last year? For those two schools, can they kick it in a conference that is a very big objective step above the Big 12?
Yeah, I want to say no, but then I'm reminded that Missouri went in and made it to Atlanta their first year.
Immediately. 2 years
in the SEC. And, Texas A&M obviously has not had the same level of success since they've been there. But, the immediate thought was like, well, they'll never be able to do it week in and week out. And then I remember Missouri, a few plays away from a national championship, when they were playing in Atlanta. So now you're gone with divisions. I don't know. So I look at Texas as certainly being a little bit more ready to compete this year than Oklahoma. But I do think long term, like, how do you stack these programs up? And it's so hard because of the week to week to week. But I think that I saw Jake Crane make this point this week, and he does a great job. But it isn't so much the big matchups against Alabama or Georgia or LSU. Like, obviously they're going to be up and ready for those, but it is the weird game against Auburn in the middle of November that you're just
Mississippi State in Starkville, where you're like, oh, okay,
stuff like that. Having to play A&M, right? They can get anybody going to Williams-Brice, going down to the Swamp, right? Florida's been bad recently, but that's not an easy place to play, and so it is. It's the week in and week out of that. That said, I look at Texas in like tier 2, Texas and Oklahoma in like tier 2 of the SEC. There is no doubt that they've got to do some things to shore some things up there. They can't have the random off game that you saw Texas barely escape Manhattan, and you've seen Oklahoma lose games they shouldn't.
Texas and Houston last year,
yeah, they could have had 4 losses, and then you would have had all the like drama at the end. But but when I look at the SEC, I mean, it is Alabama and it is Georgia above everyone else, right? And then it's the tier of LSU, Florida when they're doing well. This year, Ole Miss and Missouri are in there. I put Texas, Oklahoma in that. Like, I think they're head and shoulders better than some of those teams we mentioned. Mississippi State, South Carolina. Arkansas, I think they're both above A&M. I think they're both above Missouri on any given year. Now, Missouri this year should be pretty good, but I think they're better than Arkansas. Obviously, everybody's better than Vandy. They're better than most of the teams out there, and so I have them in that tier 2. What's that mean though? It means one year they're going to go 10-2, and the next year they're going to go 8-4 because they're going to run it. So yeah, there's not going to be a lot of 11-1s anymore for Texas, Oklahoma. I don't see them going 12-0 ever because you are going to have to play some of those tougher teams. Even this year, Florida is so bad, and you still have to play a Florida team that's better than all those teams you struggled with last year, right? They're better than Kansas State. They're better than so yeah, I think that's what makes it tough. But I do still have them kind of tier 2. I think they're a perennial 8-4 to 10-2 team, both of them every year in the SEC, which 8-4 in the SEC, I don't know if that's going to cut it with their expectations. 10-2 certainly is going to get you in the playoff almost every time if you're Texas or Oklahoma with your brand. And then if you can find a way to just have one loss in the regular season, you're probably in Atlanta playing for the championship. So I expect them to do fairly well. I don't expect a lot of 7-5s or worse out of those two teams.
Now, if you're Oklahoma and you go 6-7 in the Big 12 and year one under Brent Venables, that's bad. Like, they really aren't used to the below 500 thing, and I'm going to leave them off the table for a bit, even in the tier 2. I just don't know yet until Venables proves something in a much tougher SEC. For Texas, TJ, can we forget? Why has everybody forgotten just how consistently bad they were for over a decade? They stunk going from head coach to head coach, and they finally found in Steve Sarkisian success, but it hasn't been consistent yet. Why are we all already buying Texas?
Because of 1 year, because of recency bias in one season, where they also beat the SEC's bell cow, right? Or at least last decade's bell cow. You can argue Georgia's kind of taken that over, and that's fine. Whichever way you want to go with that is fine with me. But yeah, because of 1 year, right? What you just mentioned, Venables' six win season 2 years ago. The year before that, Sarkisian had a below 5. Like, they were bad. Like, they were terrible. And nobody mentions that. Nobody ever brings that up. And you're exactly right. Like, Texas has been very up and down. We all remember the we're back. And they've had one really, really good year. But now it's like the put up or shut up year, right? Georgia comes to town. You play Oklahoma, who you still can't find a way to beat. Even in the year you go to the playoff, you couldn't beat them. Yeah. And so how do you deal with that, right? Like, how does Texas deal with all of that happening? And then they got to go to A&M at the end of the year. Like, I think Texas. I picked every single game in the SEC this year, and I picked A&M to win that game. I just think there's a lot on it. I think, let's go, man. So I don't know. I think that. I think 1 year has removed the last 20 years of mid that we remember about Texas. And recency bias is a very real thing. I get that a ton. Caitlin Clark lost the national championship, and everybody was calling her like come on, you forget about all the good, So anyway, it's the same thing in this. 1 year removed all of our remembrance of how mid they've been. And I won't be surprised at all if they're 8-4, 9-3 this year. Let's see what they do. Now they do get the benefit of going on the road to Michigan early in the year. So the weather's not a big deal, but Michigan also sending 10 guys to the NFL. But don't be surprised if Michigan comes out and wins that game in the big house, and they start out 1-1 and then have to play Oklahoma and Georgia and A&M and all these other SEC teams. I think they're in for a bit of a shock when they get there.
Before we go into Utah having a new football coach, which is just a wild thing to see, I got the ESPN push notification. I was like, oh, what? Want to put the bow on for the Big 12. You know what, TJ, I'll take the reins for a second here. For the Big 12, losing Texas and Oklahoma at the top of the conference is obviously something you did not want. Bob Bowles, we didn't want. You almost lost him to the Pac-12 a bunch of years ago, and that would have been a true mess.
Hilarious.
Your two most valuable schools walked out. However, at this point, competition becomes more open. Parity does not always equate to money in college football, but it does equate to a viewing experience that is going to be much more entertaining for fans that watched Oklahoma go to Arlington year in and year out as an automatic Big 12 champion and off to the college football playoff. That is gone. Texas, the annoying fan base, that is gone. And the money that we keep screaming about in college athletics is money that I will never see. I paid rent last month on $0 from the school that I root for. What I am here for is the invested interest in college football being entertaining. And that in the Big 12 is still at a high level. Coming up, Utah has a new football coach. What? On Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is where I go to bet a little bit of money on MLB baseball. And Major League Baseball? Yep, 100%. Because I can go say today, hey, look, the Texas Rangers are pretty bad right now. I can bet against them. So when they win, I'm happy because I'm a fan. And when they lose, I make money. And you're like, oh, well, that's not a very good way to do it. You're a fake fan. I'm making money. FanDuel.com/locked on to start making the most out of your summer. All customers get a boost or a bonus daily. That is right. There is something for everyone, every day, all summer long at FanDuel. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Go there today, bet against the Texas Rangers. You will probably win money at FanDuel.com/locked on. TJ Pittenger of College Football Addiction. I was shocked to see this week that Utah has named its next head football coach. When I got that notification, I was like, oh, what? Because, there have been the murmurs of like crazy Uncle Kyle Whittingham being ready to retire at some point and talking about how, we just saw Nick Saban do it, and expansion and realignment takes a toll on these guys, as does NIL. And now Morgan Scalley has been named the next football coach for the second time, by the way. They're like, hey, look, Scalley's going to be the predecessor to Whittingham. And they said that around until 2020, where they're like, hey, just kidding. We found some text messages where he used a slur. Not anymore. And then a few years later, just kidding again. He is going to be the next football coach. Do you think that this is the sign that Whittingham, who's in his mid-60s now, is ready to head out the door sooner than later?
Yeah, I mean, probably, right. And I think I do think it's a smart move, right? Like maybe they waited out cancel culture, and cancel culture has maybe died a little bit. And so they're able to bring it back. But I do think it's smart, because what gets recruited against so much is your longevity at a school, right? I remember, being around Florida State so much when the Seminoles were bad, right? And they won 3 years in Norvell's first year and they won 5 the next year. All the recruiting against Florida State was, well, Norvell's not even going to be there. I think it's what Florida's struggling right now with Billy Napier. Like, they're going to recruit, I think, in like the 20s this year. They're not supposed to be very good on the field, and we'll see if he does actually even make it through the year. But I think it's hard to lock elite kids in. And obviously Florida, Utah, Florida State, all kind of recruiting for different kids. But I do think it's what's smart, because when you are recruiting, that's what's used against you. And Utah, we'll talk about a team that's expected to be very good this year, and you should be able to capitalize that on the trail. And so if you're at least kind of calming that some, hey, we've got a plan in place. The guy that you're going to be learning from here, especially on the defense side of the ball, is going to be here long term. And even when I leave, I don't know, they're probably telling kids like, I'm going to have a role like Saban does, where I have an office right down the hall or something like that. Like that's probably how I would pitch it. And I don't know what his desires are past football, but I think it's smart. I mean, I do think it helps you, especially in recruiting. Like, I think that's where you're negatively recruited against so much that people want to have some certainty about their future, about where they're sending their son to go play. And so I think it makes sense from that perspective.
Man, here's what I struggle with Kyle Whittingham is he gets to the podium and just starts saying stuff. Now, not all unlike Mike Gundy. Mike Gundy's the same way. Gets to the podium, you're like, I don't know if he made a lot of sense today. Whittingham gives me that same vibe, but he's got a little moxie to him. This is the same guy who went to BYU, who for the longest time was supposed to be the head coach at BYU. He was going to be the native son that takes over and wins games for them. And then when that doesn't work out along his career path, it only bolsters the rivalry that those two teams have. And he dominated that for the better part of a decade. For that guy, I don't like what's left. Do you think can he win a national championship at Utah? Like what else can he do? He's won back-to-back Pac-12 championships, taken him to the Big 12. At some point you're in your mid-60s, you've lived out your life in the state that you come from, and you just got to be done. I'm struggling to understand what else is on the table because I don't see Utah ever winning a national championship.
Yeah, I would struggle to see them winning it, right? I think, maybe finishing out with Cam Rising, his last year maybe makes some sense, a kid that he's been with for a while. Maybe, the other side of that, is to really, I think he cares. I think he's a good guy that does care about Utah and leaving them in the best possible situation. And so like a delicate, soft handoff, right? Like you ask for a business introduction or whatever, or again, like Florida State did. Bowden was very much at the end of his time and they weren't as successful then, but they did that with Jimbo. Jimbo was there for a couple of years and really got to start that recruiting process, start doing some of that recruiting, starting to build some of those inroads so that it's not just such a harsh transition. Like Alabama's had, it's kind of the same thing with Harbaugh, right? They took Sharon Moore. Now they didn't announce in advance, but I think that what's he got left? Maybe make the playoff, maybe win this Big 12. But I don't think it's as much about career accomplishments. I think it's probably finishing out with Rising and then trying to leave Utah in a really good shape. And so, hey, if I got to do this for another year or two to make sure that this transition goes well, that's the way I'm going to do it. Now, obviously there's pros and cons to everything, right? Like you might look at it and say like, nah, it'd be better just to get it out from under your hands and get it into the new guy's hands and have Scally be ready to go. But maybe they don't feel like he's ready. Maybe they do think he needs to kind of like learn under him a little bit. And so I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm a glass half full kind of guy. Certainly not when I'm out tailgating or anything. It's almost always empty. But maybe I'm a glass half full guy, just kind of trying to look for the best possible scenario as to why they're doing it this way.
I find it interesting that from a player's perspective, you're looking at your next head coach and you don't know when he's going to be your head coach. Like anything the defensive coordinator says to you is like, okay, guy that might be my head coach within a month. There are clunky aspects like that. I don't think it's going to be a major problem for anybody involved, but for Scally to be back in a position now to be the next head coach shows that Utah has a lot of confidence in the Kyle Whittingham system and in that culture that has been instilled for the last 20 years in Salt Lake City. My question would be then, TJ, and this even bounces a bit off of what I discussed with Whittingham's college football playoff or national championship aspirations. Has he hit his ceiling? Is there anything else that Whittingham can do before he leaves? Is what he's done at Utah the peak?
Probably. I mean, unless he was going to go somewhere else, right? And have an actual, Kirby goes to the NFL and he goes to Georgia, which I don't think happens, obviously. But I mean, probably, you have to realize like where you're at, right? I mean, and what are the real prospects of Utah going out and doing anything more than they've already done, right? Winning a Rose Bowl or doing this, that, the other, winning your conference. But yeah, I mean, with the landscape of college football now, and it's just kind of an easy, simple answer. I really don't, unless he went somewhere else, right? I don't see what else he could realistically do. And even like we talked about earlier, if Utah was to get to the Big Ten, I mean, at that point, could he sneak into the playoff as a 9-3 Big Ten team? Absolutely. Do you think they're all of a sudden going to be a bigger player in the chance to win it all? Probably not. So again, I just don't know what else he could. And even that, I think that's 5-10. I don't know how soon Utah's potentially going to the Big Ten, if ever. And so realistically, he'd be 72 at that point. I think he's probably hit his ceiling at Utah. Maybe somewhere else. Could he do something crazy? Yes. I don't know that I'm expecting it.
Then it begs the question for the guy who graduated from Provo High School and went to BYU. Did they fire Kalani Sitake? And I'm just starting a firestorm in the comments now. Did they fire Kalani Sitake and bring Kyle Whittingham in his last 5 years swan song as the head coach? We've seen crazier things in college football, but I don't. This is a guy who had worked, feels like his whole career to get to one spot and then got to the furthest spot possible, the biggest rival of BYU, and beat up on that school for a long time. But TJ, the whole of college football, where we've gotten from Utah today, I'm talking Texas, Oklahoma, and who else? Maybe a Utah, West Virginia to leave the Big 12. In essence, one thing I want to point out that does get lost in a lot of these conversations is how sad a bunch of this is, that what we know of college football is very quickly going away. Like, I think back to Boise State and Oklahoma, now 20 years ago, and how monumental of an upset that was. It feels like we're losing that luster, the same thing we felt about the amateurism of college football and where schools and teams were. Do want to put the caveat, these conversations suck, because I wish the college football 10 years ago was bottled up that we had it, and I'm sure you feel the same.
Yeah, I think EA Sports has done a really good job of in their video game, right? I don't know how many people that watch or care about that, but they've done a good job of the marketing around everyone is someone's favorite team, right?
That's good.
And there may be more people that care about Florida State than UCF, right? Let's use a Big 12. That's just true, right? There's probably more people that care about Notre Dame than anyone else, right? And there's more people that care about Ohio State than Utah, and that's fine. But everybody is somebody's favorite team, and I think that's a really cool. EA Sports is not paying me. I'd be happy if they wanted to, if you guys are watching. But EA Sports is not paying me to tell. But I think that's a really I don't know. The older you get, the more sentimental you get, and that's a cool way to look at it. That's a really interesting perspective, because as fans of a certain team, right? As an FSU guy or this, that, the other, I don't care about fans of others. I just don't care, right? I care about my team. I care about my Saturday experience. I care about what happens in the fall for my team, and that's it. But it is a good perspective to remember that everyone is somebody's favorite team. And it would suck right now if you were a Syracuse football fan, right? It would suck if you were this, that, I don't have to name every single one of them, Wake Forest or Georgia Tech, oh man, uncertainty. And so that does suck. At the end of the day, it probably also really sucked when those people when other teams have moved across, when the Rams moved across the country in the middle of the night, that. But yeah, sometimes life has hard decisions, and it sucks for the sport in general. But yeah, I mean, it just kind of is. I said all that to say I sympathize with you, and then in the same breath, it is what it is. In
the same way that Swanee College used to be an SEC member, a founding SEC member. God knows where they are now. TJ Pittenger, where can folks find more of your work?
Yeah, you got the X handle down there, TJ_Pittenger. If you want to read bad takes on Twitter, if not, you can check us out, College Football Addiction, here on YouTube.
Love it. This has been and always will be Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.